In 334 BC, a 22-year-old king crossed into Asia with 37,000 soldiers. 11 years later, he had conquered the largest empire in history: Egypt, Persia, Central Asia, the edge of India. 3 million square miles of territory, never defeated in battle, not once. His name was Alexander. And for 2,000 years, historians have called him the greatest military genius who ever lived. Here is the question nobody asks. What if the genius was not Alexander? What if the army that conquered the world had been so perfectly designed, so systematically engineered, that almost any competent commander could have done what Alexander did? What if the real genius died 4 years before the conquests began? His name was Philip, and history forgot him. This is not an argument that Alexander was ordinary. He was extraordinary, but extraordinary men do not appear from nowhere. They inherit systems, they inherit tools, they inherit armies. And the army Philip II of Macedon built for his son was the most sophisticated military machine the ancient world had ever produced. Understanding what Philip built and why changes everything about how you understand what Alexander did with it. In 360 BC, the kingdom of Macedon was a joke, not a minor power, not a struggling state, a joke. The sophisticated city-states of southern Greece, Athens, Sparta, Thebes, regarded Macedon the way a major metropolitan city regards a rural backwater. Barely civilized, militarily negligible, politically irrelevant. They had reasons for this view. Macedonian infantry fought in the old style, individual warriors in loose formation, effective against each other, completely inadequate against a disciplined Greek phalanx. The kingdom had no reliable navy, its finances were chaotic, its northern borders were constantly raided by Illyrian and Thracian tribes. Its internal politics were a cycle of assassination and succession crisis. When Philip II came to power in 359 BC, he inherited a kingdom that had just lost its army to an Illyrian raid. His brother, the previous king, was dead. The treasury was empty. 3 rival claimants were competing for the throne. Philip was 23 years old. The situation was worse than it sounds. In the ancient world, a kingdom that could not defend its borders did not survive. 3 separate Illyrian tribes were raiding from the north. The Paionians were threatening from the northeast. Athens was backing one of the rival claimants to the throne. Amphipolis, one of Macedon's most strategically important cities, had just fallen to Athens. The kingdom was not struggling. It was disintegrating simultaneously on 4 fronts. Any one of these problems would have occupied a capable king for years. Philip had all of them, at once, in his first month. What he did next is the real story of Macedonian conquest. Philip had spent 3 years as a hostage in Thebes in his youth. In Thebes, he had studied under Epaminondas, the greatest military innovator of the 4th century, the man who destroyed Sparta's reputation for invincibility at the Battle of Leuctra. He did not just watch, he learned everything. When Philip returned to Macedon and took power, he immediately began building something that had never existed before. Not just an army, a system. The standard Greek hoplite carried a spear approximately 2 meters long. Philip's infantry, the Macedonian phalanx, carried the Sarissa, a pike between 5 and 7 meters long. The mathematics of this change are decisive. An enemy hoplite approaching a Macedonian phalanx would face not 1 rank of spears, but 5. The Sarissas of the first 5 ranks all projected beyond the front line simultaneously. The soldier at the front of the attacking force was not facing 1 spear point. He was facing 5. The Sarissa phalanx could not be charged frontally. It was physically impossible. The question was how to exploit this defensive wall offensively. Philip's answer was the companion cavalry. Philip recruited the Macedonian aristocracy directly into his personal cavalry force, the hetairoi, the companions. He trained them not as individual noble warriors fighting for personal glory, the traditional role of cavalry in ancient warfare, but as a coordinated shock force that operated as a single unit under central command. The companions rode in wedge formation. They struck at a specific point on the enemy line identified by Philip or Alexander before the battle. They did not pursue fleeing enemies. They turned and struck again where needed. They were controlled. This was revolutionary. Cavalry that took orders and followed them in the chaos of battle was almost unprecedented in the ancient world. The genius, and this is Philip's genius, not Alexander's, was understanding that the Sarissa phalanx and the companion cavalry were not two separate weapons. They were one system. The phalanx fixed the enemy infantry, it pinned them, held them in place, prevented them from maneuvering. While the phalanx was doing this, the companion cavalry identified the weakest point in the enemy line, usually where their own cavalry had been driven off, and struck there with concentrated force. The enemy was simultaneously being held by the phalanx and being shattered by the cavalry. The two weapons created a situation the enemy could not solve. Stop the cavalry and the phalanx would grind them down. Stop the phalanx and the cavalry would ride through them. It was a trap, built into the army's fundamental structure, executed every time. Philip also added siege engineers, supply officers, road builders, intelligence networks, and diplomatic specialists to his military organization. The Macedonian army was not a fighting force with some logistics attached. It was a complete military system, the most complete the ancient world had seen since the Roman legion we examined in Video 2. None of this was cheap. A Sarissa phalanx required full-time professional soldiers who could train together constantly. The companion cavalry required horses, equipment, and the salaries of Macedonian nobles. The siege engineers and supply infrastructure required specialists. Philip solved this the same way. Carthage solved its naval problem by finding a resource and systematically exploiting it. In 356 BC, he captured the gold and silver mines at Mount Pangaion in Thrace. The mines produced approximately 1,000 talents of silver per year. At a stroke, Philip had more revenue than any Greek city-state. He used it all on the army, not on buildings, not on luxuries, not on the court spectacles that contemporary kings used to demonstrate their wealth. On soldiers, on training, on equipment, on the siege engineers who could take walled cities, on the road builders who could move the army faster than any enemy expected. When Alexander crossed into Asia in 334 BC, he had approximately 6,500 cavalry, 12,000 Macedonian infantry, and 15,000 allied Greek infantry. He also had enough money for approximately 3 months of operations. 3 months for an army attempting to conquer Persia. He was depending on the army's ability to win quickly and live off conquered territory. This was not recklessness. This was calculated confidence in the system Philip had built. The Battle of the Granicus River in 334 BC was the first major engagement of Alexander's campaign. It was also the first test of whether Philip's system worked without Philip. The Persian commanders made a fundamental error. They deployed their cavalry along the bank of the Granicus River, using the river itself as a defensive barrier, with their Greek mercenary infantry, the best troops they had, held in reserve on the high ground behind. Alexander's generals advised caution. The crossing was dangerous. The bank was steep and held by Persian cavalry. "Wait," they said, "cross at dawn when the Persians are less alert." Alexander refused. He attacked immediately. What followed was not a display of personal bravery, though Alexander personally led the cavalry charge and nearly died when a Persian nobleman struck at his helmet. What followed was the Macedonian system executing its designed function. The Macedonian infantry crossed the river and engaged the Persian cavalry frontally, fixing them. While the Persian cavalry was occupied, the companion cavalry under Alexander found the gap and drove through. The Persian line collapsed. The Greek mercenary infantry, the best troops on the Persian side, were surrounded and largely annihilated after the battle. Not because Alexander was a tactical genius, because the system had been designed to produce exactly this outcome. One battle, Persia's grip on Asia Minor was broken. At Issus in 333 BC, Alexander faced Darius III of Persia personally for the first time. The Persian king commanded an army that ancient sources estimate at 100,000 to 600,000 men, the higher numbers almost certainly exaggerated, but even conservative modern estimates suggest 60,000 to 100,000 against Alexander's 35,000. The terrain was narrow, the coastal plain between mountains and sea, which negated Persian numerical advantage. Philip had taught Alexander to choose or accept terrain that neutralized enemy strengths. The battle followed the Macedonian template exactly. The phalanx fixed the Persian center. Alexander personally led the companion cavalry in a charge that found the gap between the Persian center and left. He drove toward Darius himself. Darius fled. His mother, wife, and daughters were captured. His treasury fell to Alexander. The Persian Empire had just been shown that it could not defeat the Macedonian system even with overwhelming numerical superiority. At Gaugamela in 331 BC, Darius chose open flat ground specifically to allow his numbers to deploy fully. He prepared the ground in advance, leveling areas to allow his scythed chariots to operate. He had more cavalry than Alexander, more infantry than Alexander, and the ground he wanted. He also had a fundamental problem he could not solve. Alexander's oblique advance created a gap in the Persian line. The companion cavalry found it. While Darius was trying to envelop Alexander's flanks, Alexander drove through the center toward Darius a second time. Darius fled again. The Persian Empire effectively ended that afternoon. 3 battles. The same system. The same result. The trap Philip had engineered into the army's structure, executing against 3 completely different deployments in 3 different terrains against 3 different armies. Here is where the argument gets honest. The Macedonian military system was Philip's creation. The Sarissa phalanx, the companion cavalry, the combined arms doctrine, the siege engineers, the supply network, the financial base, all Philip. So what did Alexander actually contribute? The answer is more interesting than simply saying he was a passenger in his father's machine. First, speed. Alexander moved faster than anyone expected, not just quickly, at a pace that ancient sources found almost supernatural. He force-marched his army distances that Persian commanders assumed impossible. Speed was his personal contribution to the system's effectiveness. Philip had built the machine. Alexander drove it faster than Philip ever had. Second, personal courage deployed strategically. Alexander's habit of personally leading the companion cavalry charge was not recklessness. It was a calculated leadership tool. By putting himself at the point of the decisive strike, he guaranteed that the most important tactical moment of each battle received the best leadership in the army. It also meant that when the blow landed, it landed with absolute commitment, no hesitation, no holding back. Third, the psychological campaign. Alexander understood that conquest required more than military victory. He presented himself as the liberator of Greek cities under Persian rule, as the legitimate heir of Persian kingship in conquered territories, as a god-king in Egypt. He managed the political narrative of the campaign with extraordinary sophistication. Fourth, adaptation beyond the system. At the Hydaspes River in India in 326 BC, Alexander faced war elephants in numbers his father's system had not been designed to counter. He devised a new tactical solution on the spot, using his infantry in loose formation to avoid the elephants while his cavalry attacked the flanks. He adapted. So Alexander was not a passenger. He was a first-rate commander operating a first-rate machine. The question is not whether he was capable. He was. The question is whether his reputation accurately reflects the relative contributions of father and son. Here is the most devastating evidence in the argument. When Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BC at 32 years old, he left no designated successor and no functioning political structure for his empire. His generals, the Diadochi, immediately began fighting each other. These were the men who had operated Philip's system alongside Alexander. They had watched every battle. They had commanded under the same doctrine. They had access to the same trained Macedonian troops. None of them conquered the world. None of them came close. Antigonus, Seleucus, Ptolemy, Cassander, brilliant commanders, all of them, experienced in the system, commanding Macedonian troops. Between them they fought for 40 years and divided the empire into fragments. The difference was not the system. They all had the system. The difference was Alexander. And this is the honest conclusion the argument produces. Philip built a machine that made conquest possible. Alexander had the qualities, The speed, the personal courage, the psychological intelligence, the capacity for strategic adaptation that made the machine achieve results beyond what any other operator could have produced. The genius was collaborative. Philip created the possibility. Alexander realized it. Calling Alexander the sole genius of the Macedonian conquests is wrong. Ignoring Philip's contribution is a historical injustice. But denying Alexander's personal contribution is also wrong. The truth is that the ancient world had never seen a combination like this before. The best designed military system ever built, operated by a commander of exceptional personal ability. Together, they were unstoppable. Neither alone would have changed history in the same way. Philip was assassinated in 336 BC, 2 years before the conquests began. He never saw what his machine could do at its full potential. He was murdered at his own daughter's wedding feast. The assassin was one of his own bodyguards. The motive was personal, a grievance over a broken promise, possibly orchestrated by one of Philip's wives. The greatest military innovator of the ancient world died over a domestic dispute before his life's work reached its conclusion. Ancient sources focused on Alexander because Alexander's campaigns were the visible spectacle. The battles, the conquests, the march to the edge of the known world. Philip's work, the training doctrine, the equipment design, the financial infrastructure, the diplomatic groundwork, was invisible by the time the campaigns began. It had been absorbed into the army. It was the army. There was no separate credit to assign. This is the same pattern we have seen throughout this channel. The Carthaginian system that built 200 warships was invisible until divers found the barcode on a timber on the sea floor. The Roman logistics network that moved legions across 3 continents was invisible because it worked so well it seemed natural. The Spanish logistics failure was invisible until you look at the barrel staves. Systems are always invisible. The people who build them rarely get the credit. The people who use them receive it all. Philip built the system. Alexander used it magnificently. History gave Alexander everything. The Macedonian combined arms system, phalanx and cavalry working as a single integrated machine, became the template for military organization in the Hellenistic world for 200 years after Alexander's death. Every successor kingdom adopted it. Rome eventually learned to defeat it. The Macedonian phalanx was too rigid for the flexible Roman legion in broken terrain. But even Rome's tactical evolution was partly a response to studying the Macedonian system. The cultural legacy was even larger. Alexander's conquests spread Greek language, philosophy, science and architecture from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. The Hellenistic age, the 2 centuries after Alexander, produced some of the greatest intellectual achievements in human history: Euclid, Archimedes, Eratosthenes, the Library of Alexandria. The synthesis of Greek and Near Eastern thought that would eventually influence Rome, Islam, and through both of them, the modern world. None of this happens without the conquests. None of the conquests happen without Philip's army. The invisible system produced visible history. Alexander understood this. On the night before the Battle of Gaugamela, when his generals urged a night attack on the Persian army to reduce the numerical odds, Alexander refused. "I will not steal my victory," he said. He meant it tactically. He would not win through surprise or deception, but through the system in open battle. But the line contains something else. A confidence so complete that facing the entire Persian army in daylight on ground, Darius had chosen was not a risk, but a preference. That confidence had a name, and it was built in Macedon over 20 years by a king history forgot. There is a tomb in Vergina in northern Greece that archaeologists believe belongs to Philip II of Macedon. It was discovered in 1977. Inside were golden objects of extraordinary craftsmanship, armor, a diadem, vessels, and the cremated remains of a man whose left eye socket shows evidence of the wound Philip received in battle early in his reign. The tomb was intact, unlooted, hidden for 2,000 years. The man inside had changed the world more completely than almost any human being in history. He had designed the system that conquered the largest empire ever assembled. He died before it happened. History gave his son the credit. The objects in the tomb are beautiful. The armor is magnificent. The diadem is extraordinary. And if you know the story, the real story, every one of those objects is more interesting than the legends about the sun, because the sun had the better biographers. In our next video, we are going to 1260 AD. The Mongol army had never lost. It had destroyed Baghdad, extinguished the Abbasid Caliphate, and reached the Mediterranean. Then, former slaves stopped them, not through luck, not through numbers, through a military system so counterintuitive it had never been tried before. If Philip II's story changed how you think about who really builds history, subscribe. The next one goes even deeper. Vanguard history.